Hello everybody, welcome back to the Educatedcollins Snap channel. How you doing? You doing well? You doing well? You doing well? Hope so. Today we are going to be talking about Galactus Ramp. So this is a big one. I really wonder how long this video is going to be, but yeah, we're going to be breaking down the Galactus archetype. This is the first video really showcasing a big bang, a bit bad. The reason why I haven't really done these videos are they are kind of complicated, but I haven't had access to them. And initially I thought, oh, I wouldn't do a good job essentially since I hadn't played them. But I got Thanos recently and like I didn't learn anything from playing the deck. I was like, oh, I already know mostly everything. So I figured, okay, maybe I can just make these. Anyways, I don't want to dilly-dally here. This is going to be a long one anyways, but Galactus Ramp, let's talk about it, how to play it, how to really pilot it, and how to really think about this archetype. Let's get started. Anyways, what is Galactus Ramp? What is this annoying deck? Well, this deck, well, some people will take offense to that. This deck is fantastic, theoretically. But the strategy is to play a ramp card and then drop Galactus. Finally, you then use your resources after the Galactus to lock down the single lane. Usually, if you can get Galactus down, you're in a really good spot because your deck is designed around getting the Galactus down, while your opponent's decks usually are not. And you have the power position to really lock down the game, win the game, be in a much better position, even though you spend your resources playing down a 2-power card very late in the game. So that is Galactus Ramp. That is how you do it. So here we have a standard list. The nice thing about these lists is that they're all very samey. I've did a lot of research for this one, and I've come to the conclusion that all the lists are very similar to each other, right? Because you need the ramp, you need the Galactus, you need something to lock down after the Galactus. So there's not too many cards that go into that. So you end up getting very similar lists. A lot of the unique lists really mix and match like a max like 2 to 3 cards. So it's very common to have a pretty good list if you have Galactus. Now the problem with Galactus is that a lot of the other pieces are expensive, right? Knull is another not Series 3 card for now that you have to figure out how to get. And then there's a lot of Series 3 cards as well that you're putting into this equation. So that is maybe the downside of this archetype if you get it early, but it's still usable. It's just not as great, right, to do it without all the pieces. Now let's talk about some of the core pieces here. So first things off, we do have Wave. This does let you play Galactus on turn 4 or turn 5, and then you can play your lockdown. So your lockdown isn't necessarily like Spider-Man being your only lockdown. Lockdown is just like any card that allows you to win. So Knull can be locked down. Essentially, that's kind of how I'm looking at it. After you play your Galactus, you play something that just wins you the game. So that's really how you want to look at it. Electro is also another alternative ramp condition, right? So it gives you extra mana ramp into Galactus. You don't get to Galactus on 4, but you do get to Galactus on 5 and then play whatever afterwards. So it's just another way of ramping into Galactus before the last turn. Now, next up, we do have Galactus. So what is the benefit of Galactus? Well, you get to say kneel before Galactus. You know, every time you see that animation, comes down, destroys the lanes. Really cool. So, I mean, I think that's like the really important part of this card. Every other reason to play this isn't as important as that particular fact. Now, moving on. Yes, we're moving on. Next up, we have Knull. I do now consider this a core piece. Before I made this guy, I did not think you needed Knull, but after I did it, I do think like a lot of decks just have to use Knull as their closing out piece, just because it finalizes your win by playing a huge power minion that you get from absorbing the powers from destroying the 2 lanes. So it's just a really nice closer. There's not a lot of easy alternative closers, maybe destroyers like the other one, but Knull is really the key one that you're looking for. And then Death is just another nice closing piece. You can play this card very cheaply when minions on the other two lanes are destroyed, right? Because it counts all of them, and you just need to destroy a couple of them to really get the down to very, very low cost. This is definitely another way you can really close out the game. Play this, and maybe Shang-Chi or something like that can really do wonders for you. So, what are the some of the pieces of the archetype? Well, first off, we have the early game tools. So they're not all ramp, but these cards let you get expensive cards early, or they set up your board state to utilize Galactus a little bit more effectively. So some of the pieces, right, we have Electro, we have Wave, we talked about. We have Dr. Octopus. This is a very nice tool for Galactus because you can play all of their counterplay down to another side, and then Galactus will close out that lane, and all those counter pieces become destroyed. So that's another very good tool for Galactus decks to really ramp into what they want to do. And then Wolverine is nice because it gets destroyed, and then it gets stronger, and then it goes to Galactus lane. So even though you're playing just a 2-power Galactus with Wolverine, you can end up getting a 6-power Galactus if you're lucky, or if things got destroyed earlier, you can get even stronger Wolverine. So definitely another tool of the toolbox that you can use. Now, next up, we have the Galactus Finishers. So these cards really give you the win after you play Galactus. They really generate lots of huge power, or they can prevent your opponent from competing, whether destroying their minions or just locking them from doing anything at all. So the cards we're really focusing on are Destroyer, Knull, Death. These are the cards that have huge stat lines, huge power states that can just give you a lot of power. And then Spider-Man and Shang-Chi, these can really lock down your opponent. Spider-Man just preventing them from playing if you wave earlier, and then Shang-Chi just destroy any of their options that they want to do, right? So you can already know, oh, maybe, you'll do it in a lane they already have a big minion on, and then you just, practice your Shang-Chi fielding into that particular lane. So those are really some of the finishers you're looking for. Now, how do you pilot Galactus? How do you do it? How do you make it work? First step is drawing Galactus. Have you drawn Galactus? Good. Okay, we can move on. All right, after you've done that, you do need to set up a lane where you can safely play Galactus. So unfortunately, that's really one of the downsides, one of the weaknesses. It has to be an empty lane, and that can be a problem sometimes if your opponent knows what they're doing. So you just have to pay attention to the opponent's deck list. Can they annoy you? Can they make it hard for you to play an empty lane? And you also have to check the locations, right? Is there a location that's forcing you to play somewhere on a particular lane? That can really mess you up where, oh, I'm forced to play here when I want to play Galactus, and that lane isn't empty. Well, then you're going to be in trouble. So you always have to be paying attention to the locations, paying attention to the lanes, paying attention to your opponents and their deck lists to really find the perfect window to play down Galactus. Next up, we'll talk about a lot of your cards before Galactus. They don't really matter because they're going to get destroyed, and whatever you're doing there is not really that important. What's important is that you get your Galactus down, and then usually you get some minions down so that your destroy is cheap, or whatnot. If you're not going death route, then it doesn't really matter at all. So just try not to be too obvious with Galactus, and that's really the hardest thing with playing Galactus decks, is just not telling your opponent you're playing Galactus deck from your deck list, right? The early cards you play. So, playing an Electro is not really going to tell your opponent that you're playing Galactus, but doing something like Yondu into Wave, or Yondu into Wolverine into Wave, like that, all that stuff can really just tell your opponent you're playing Galactus. So you do have to be careful that you try not to get into like a very punishable situation where if they know you're about to drop down Galactus, they can immediately counteract that. So I would say not being obvious is slightly hard with the current deck. The best or effective way to confuse and surprise people is just to add non-obvious Galactus synergistic cards to try to stack out your opponent. If you can build a deck that doesn't really feel like they're going to play Galactus, like one that does that well is like adding Thanos in, because usually Thanos isn't necessarily screaming they're playing Galactus, it's screaming I'm playing Thanos, and you're not really thinking about Galactus. That kind of thing can surprise people, catch them off guard. It's just sometimes harder to pilot, but that would be the well, an effective way to just get people off the Galactus trail. So if you can confuse them, prevent them from playing around Galactus, that's really how you can get those nice sneaky wins. But other than that, you just have to rely on like, oh, maybe they don't have a counter or something like that. But once you get Galactus down, then you have a couple of finishers. Spider-Man, Knull, Death, plus something can do a lot of work. Shang-Chi can also do wonders. So once you have Galactus down, that's really the hardest part of the equation, because your deck is built to play with Galactus down, while your opponent's decks usually are not. So if you can get it down, you should probably be in a good position. You should probably be thinking about snapping anytime that situation can happen. Now, of course, we were going to ask, what do you do if you do not get Galactus? If you don't draw it, whatever, it gets destroyed, discarded, who knows? There are not too many strategies to win without Galactus. I'm just going to throw it out. Your whole deck relies on Galactus. So if you don't have Galactus, you're completely on the back foot. You have to be aware of that. You can't be like, oh, I can win without Galactus. You might be able to, but I'm definitely going to recommend, if it's risky, you shouldn't go for it. Now, if you are going to find a win, it probably has to include something with Shang-Chi, Spider-Man, or some function of Destroyer or Death, right? Like, so maybe a Collapsed Minds with some type of Death synergy could get you there, but you really have to be in a unique situation for you to get it done without the Galactus. Your Galactus is your main win con, so if you don't have Galactus, you've lost your main win con. It's really going to be somewhat difficult, right? Let's not beat around the bush there. Now, don't be afraid to just leave, right? Like, giving one cube is much better than staying in. I say staying in. This should be staying in. Hey, I make typos too, guys. And losing 4 cubes. If you don't have Galactus, you just don't have it. It's not that big of a deal to just leave if you don't have the pieces. Just say, okay, my deck is designed around getting a card. 25% of the game, I'm not going to get this card. Even more than 25% of the game, I'm not going to get it when I need it. So, whatever, here's your cube. That kind of thing. Now, let's talk about some of the powerful plays you can do with Galactus. So, wave into Galactus, turn 4 Galactus into something like Spider-Man could be very, very strong, very, very good lockdown. Another thing you can do is Electro into Dr. Octopus into Galactus. So you play the Electro, you get the Dr. Octopus, it puts all of their problems into one lane, and then you Galactus a different lane, and you're like, you don't got any of your threats anymore. I get this win here. Something can be really good. And then last one we're talking about is Galactus into Destroyer plus Death. If you can Galactus safely, well then, you've probably killed a lot of minions, so then you can maybe go Destroyer into Death. That can be a very strong way of closing out a game, right? Dropping down 29 power in a couple turns. So those type of things are something you want to be looking for. There's a decent amount of stuff you can do with Galactus. It is a fun card that has a lot of like cool mechanics tied to it, so definitely could make that work. Now, here are some of the flex spots. I said this earlier, but there wasn't that much differences between a lot of the Galactus decks I looked at. It's not too many flexible spots. I would say there are more things you can change besides these, but these are the ones that I didn't really talk about in the guide that you could really just like toss out and not really feel too bad about. But Yondu you can put in because it drops down your death. It's very cheap to play. Wolverine, right, gets better with Galactus, but you don't really need it, right? If you're going to win, this is not really a lot of times the difference maker. And then Chavez just is for consistency. You really don't even play this card, but it just means that you're going to draw Galactus usually when you need it, and that's kind of why it's in there. So it is an important card, but it's not like necessary. Now, something different that I haven't really done before is I'm putting alternate versions of the deck. So here I want to talk about Nimrod Galactus. So this is a viable archetype that people do play with Galactus. They put Nimrod in there and try to make it work. I put a deck list for that particular archetype. And I also want to talk about how you pilot this a little bit because it's a little bit different, right? The key differences is you also want to think about setting up your Nimrod for Galactus or Destroyer. Nimrod opens up an extra win condition besides just playing Galactus. So that's a nice thing about this particular deck list. I wouldn't say it's generally better, but you have more ways to win than just having to draw Galactus. So with the Nimrod, you can say, okay, if I hit the Nimrod, if I can do Galactus, that can give me the win. Now, something I want to talk about with Nimrod is that there is a mechanic for getting multiple copies on the Destroyer, on the Galactus lane. So if you put Nimrod in the leftmost non-Galactus lane, you'll get 2 copies of the Nimrod, because what happens is when you play Destroyer, the leftmost lane gets destroyed first, then the other rightmost lane gets destroyed. So if Nimrod is in the leftmost destroyed lane, I wonder if it looks like the right side. It does look like the right side, but the leftmost side, I guess, even though it's right for me, that lane will get destroyed, get a copy in both the Galactus lane and then the right lane, and then that right lane will get destroyed, put a copy into the Galactus lane again, so you'll get 2 copies. So here are some examples, right? Galactus on the left lane. If you play Galactus in the middle, you'll get 2 copies of Nimrod, because this will die, then this will die, you'll get 2 copies. If you put it on the right lane, you'll also get 2 copies, because this will die once again, then this will die, you'll get 2 copies. Now, pretty cool. What if you put Nimrod in the middle lane here? If you put Galactus on the left, once again, you'll get 2 copies, because first of all, leftmost lane, this will die, then this will die, you'll get 2 copies. Now, if you put it on the right lane here, this dies first. The leftmost lane. Oh, you can't see my arrow. You can't see my arrow, unfortunately. I wonder if I can fix that. Whatever. But the leftmost lane will die, and then the middle lane will die. So since the middle lane is dying second, that you're not going to get a proc of Nimrod from that leftmost lane, so you'll only get 1 copy. Now, I didn't put an example for this, but let's say the Nimrod was in the rightmost lane, right? No matter where you put it, you would only get 1 copy, because it's not in the leftmost lane, right? So that lane is always dying second, so your Galactus will only get 1 copy. I hope this helps people. Just to clarify why some people are getting 2 copies of Nimrod and some people are only getting 1, is because they're playing their Nimrods in the leftmost lane where the Galactus would be. So hope that helps. All right, now I want to put another alternative version. This is a turn 6 Galactus version. So the difference here is that you have the option of playing Galactus on turn 6. It doesn't mean you're going to always play Galactus on turn 6. You still have Electro Ramp, you still have Psylocke Ramp, and you could play Wave if you want to. Like, you don't have to play this particular art deck list, but I'm just putting it. You still can ramp earlier, but because you're running goblins, you can also just play your Galactus a little bit earlier. So that's the difference here. You have the option of playing Galactus on turn 6 with cards like the Goblin, and then you also have the Nova follow-up, you have the Nimrod follow-up. So you're not necessarily, it's a little bit of both. You're not necessarily focused on just doing Galactus stuff. You can still just play the Goblin into Galactus, or you can play Nimrod into Galactus, or you can just ramp into Galactus and then do something else, maybe play Destroyer afterwards. So you just have a little bit more options there. Now I want to talk about the flex spot options, just some of the things you could add. So one thing to keep in mind is I do have some of the alternative options in here, just because we're talking about the main deck here. We don't have Nimrod in the main deck, we don't have Goblins in the main deck, we don't have Shuri in the main deck. So these are options you can put into your deck. So Iceman Scorpion, these are just annoying cards. Because your early game doesn't really matter, there's not a lot of early game that you can really put in. I see some people putting like Sunspot and Lizard, but like that doesn't matter. If you're gonna win, you're playing Galactus, and Galactus means that you don't care about Lizard or Sunspot or anything like that. So those don't really make sense to me. But Iceman can definitely be annoying, and Scorpion can also. So those two I can see putting in if you want to just be the annoying Galactus player. And then Psylocke is just another ramp tool if you don't have one of the premium ramp options. And then Cloak is cool because it means that you can move your your all those annoying units to one side. So something that happens a lot is you'll get a location that absolutely screws you, like Central Park, right, where it summons a unit to every location. That can really just say, oh, you've lost if you're a Galactus player. With Cloak, that's not the case, right? With Cloak, you can just play Cloak, move everything to one side, and then Galactus like normal. So this is an actual pretty good tool if you want to use that into a Galactus game. So that's definitely something you can make work if you're finding that being a very annoying situation coming up often. Now, something continue on. We have Kang we can talk about. This can just be a nice alternative. After you play your Galactus, you can just drop down a Kang, see what they're going to do, and then you can say, oh, I always win here. And that could be just annoying because if you do that, like your opponent's always leaving. Like, why would you stay if they see exactly what you're playing? Unless your play is like super cool, or they have another very powerful but very different play they can do. Like maybe instead of doing their play, they Shang-Chi you, and now like, oh, you didn't see that coming. So that's something you have to be aware of. But a lot of times they'll just leave because they don't want to deal with it. Daredevil can be a cool way of playing around their turn 5. So if you think, oh, they're going to try to bait you, you think they're running some type of counter to your Galactus, you can just see what they're going to do, and then if they're not doing it, well, then you just drop down the Galactus and you're fine. Okoye Nakia, it's not Nakia, but whatever the name is, those can work because you don't really care about your early game, but you do care about buffing the cards that you're going to draw, whether you're buffing your Galactus or your Destroyer or any of your cards you're playing act for the Galactus. Since your early game doesn't really matter too much, you can just play a buff card and then just like have the buff stay after the Galactus destroys all the lanes. So that could definitely be something you can do. Destroy archetype is another archetype you could put into Galactus. It just fits really well because you're already playing a lot of destroy cards, so you could just add more destroy archetypes and have that as a secondary option. If you don't draw your Galactus, you can just say, okay, I'll go destroy deck, and if I don't draw my Galactus, I'll just play a destroy archetype. So that's something you can do. Thanos is definitely available because of the Time Stone. Time Stone means you can ramp and also just play Galactus early, so that's definitely something we talked about earlier in being sneaky with your deck list. But yeah, Thanos can definitely work very well here and do a lot of damage for you. Maximus, once again, can be really strong, just giving you a lot of power for cheap cost after your Galactus if you want to do it that way. I don't really think it's necessary, right? You're usually playing a big guy, but maybe you're scared of Shang-Chi and you want to have multiple small guys instead. Leech, I guess if you want to do it, like I'm not gonna recommend it. And then some other archetypes you can play is Yellow Jacket, Adam Warlock. If you want to try drawing to make the Galactus more consistent, right? You just draw more so you can have a higher chance of seeing your Galactus when you need it. Ebony Maw is not really there because it's a good early 1-drop temp, but it's really there because it buffs up your Knull and it's just a nice early big high power card to make your Knull eat good. So that's something you can do. Mr. Negative is another archetype you can play. A 2 power 6, a 2 energy 6 power Galactus can be pretty annoying, especially if you buff it up in some ways. We've seen people play like thousands of health on your, I mean, thousands of health is like so rare, but like very high health Galactus and work that way. It's more of a fun deck. I wouldn't necessarily it's a strong deck, but it's fun. And if it goes off, it's always like a highlight. And then the Hood is just another early game card you can play. You destroy the Hood, and then you have this 1 cost, very powerful demon in your hand. So something you can do. Now let's talk about some of the core card alternative options. I'm going to say you need Galactus, of course. And then I would say you need 2 ramps usually. 1 ramp is definitely a little bit risky, so I'm going to go on the safe side and say you need 2. The ramp can include Electro, Wave, Psylocke, and then the Thanos Time Stone, I believe, is what it's called. Those things can definitely do some work for you. And then you need a way to get a big card down, either after Galactus or before Galactus. So Shuri is really meaning Hobgoblin. So like Goblin, Shuri, Hobgoblin, that kind of thing before the Galactus, or you can go Destroyer of Death. Those are some of the common big cards you can do. There are other ones, but these are really the ones that really most people rely on. So those are the ones I'm going to recommend. Now, when should you snap? Before you play Galactus, this one's a no-brainer. If you're snapping after Galactus, it's like snapping after Jubilee. You're doing something wrong. You gotta trust that your Galactus is gonna go off. You gotta trust that your deck's gonna work, and rely on, hey, this is how my deck works. If you're snapping before after Galactus, you're really doing something wrong. It has to be before you play the Galactus. Once the Galactus is down, your opponent knows your whole game plan, and they know whether they've won or lost. So you have to definitely make sure you punish them before that happens. Now, sometimes before you even play the ramp, let's say your hand is pretty good, you're playing wave into Galactus, and if you play the wave in that spot, maybe you're telegraphing the Galactus too much. So you definitely have to want to snap before the wave comes down so that you're not like super telegraphing, hey, I'm playing Galactus, that kind of thing. So that's definitely something to think about. And then when your hand and board can safely play Galactus into combos, so let's say you play Electro, and then you draw like your Galactus, and then you have a perfect follow-up for that, that's another time to snap. When you can have that perfect follow-up where if the Galactus goes down and I have the combos, I win, that's another time to snap. So you definitely have to, it all revolves around Galactus, of course, but that's really what the deck is built to do. So you want to make sure you're punishing anytime you have those combos in your hand. Now, what are some of the weaknesses of Galactus? There's a lot of them. Yeah, I know. Look at this list of cards. Yeah, so Cosmo can mess you up. Goose can mess you up. Debris can mess you up. Viper can mess you up. Arrow can mess you up. Leech can mess you up. Daredevil, right? Daredevil can see where you're going to play and really prepare for that matchup. So that can mess you up. Spider-Man, if they know what you're doing, can also mess you up. And then Expert Titania usage is pretty hard to do effectively, but very good players that are very comfortable with Titania can just be like, oh, let me just give you a Titania for no reason. Like, and then you're about to play Galactus, and then that you play Galactus, the Titania jumps back to their board, and you don't get the proc. Yeah, I've seen it happen a couple of times, and it definitely feels awful. So, yeah, that can also really mess you up. And then another weakness is just that a lot of times you're only getting 2 cubes from playing well, because you'll play down the Galactus and then they'll know they can't win and then they'll leave and then you'll get 2 cubes. So it can be a slow climb just because it's hard to get 8 cubes. It's really hard to get 8 cubes with Galactus decks, right? Where some other decks have ways to get 8 cubes a lot easier. So that's really one of the big downsides of this deck list. Just the difficulty of getting more than like 4 cubes at max. Now, finally, we have some example builds, some things to take a look at. So I said earlier, a lot of the builds are very samey, but here I put some. I really wonder if this is very similar to the Nimrod deck that I showed earlier. I'm just going to check. It's not, okay. I just wanted to check. But yeah, this is just another Galactus list using Nimrod. There's no Destroyer here, but we do have the Shuri, the Goblin, the Green Goblin, and then some Destroy pieces, just something to look at. Next up, here we have one using Kang. It also uses Daredevil, so you have that Daredevil safety net, plus you have the Kang to really just check after the Galactus just to see if you win, or even before if you feel like scared of something, you can check. But generally, you want to use it after the Galactus to really check if you're winning that lane. Now, third, we have this is very much a heavy Destroy synergy, also very Nimrod-esque. So this just gives you another win con here with the Nimrod, with the Carnage, Venom, and then you have all these Destroy pieces to really fit into that metagame. If you want to do this, this is definitely something you can do. And next up, we have just a ramping one. This one uses the cloak that I talked about if you want to go that direction. There's no Destroyer as well. So this one just switches out cloak for Destroyer. Like that's deck building, baby. Let's go. So I mean it works, right? It just gives you another way of dealing with having those bad locations or really bad scenarios happen. You can just move it all to one side. And then this fifth one is just an Adam Warlock variant where you're using Adam Warlock Yellow Jacket to really get some early draws and then hope that gives you that consistency into hitting the Galactus. And then once you hit the Galactus, everything goes safely, everything starts working. So it's pretty one-dimensional because you really hope that you draw that Yellow Jacket Adam Warlock combo early, and if you do, you can really make it work. So that's definitely something you can do. And then last but not least, well, I wouldn't say this deck is particularly consistent, right? Because it's a Mr. Negative decks, and those decks are inherently not as good because, or not as consistent. Not saying they're bad, but they're just not consistent because you have to draw Mr. Negative very early in the game, and usually you need some type of extra ramp. But this is a Mr. Negative Galactus deck where you could maybe play a big Galactus. You have that Shuri, so you can drop this Galactus into the Knull, right? The Knulls can be 0 power. The Galactus can be very cheap. You can Zola. You still have the Nimrod combo as well. You also have the Black Panther combo if you want to do that. So you just have like other win conditions besides the Galactus. But really, the Galactus is just what you want to be doing, especially if you are focused on playing Galactus. So those are the 6 archetypes. This is Galactus. I tried to be as depth as I could. Hope you guys learned something. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Good luck in the new season. Take care of yourselves and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Educatedcollins snap. Once you watch him, you won't go back. He'll teach you to marvel snap. Your skills will be